Daniel Hayes had been a soldier long enough to know what war really looked like. It was not the shining glory written in the news back home, nor the proud speeches given by generals before the battles. It was dust, smoke, blood, and fear. It was the cries of the wounded echoing in his ears long after the gunfire had stopped. On that day, the battlefield was no different. The air shook with the thunder of explosions. Flames leapt from broken machines, and the ground was torn apart by weapons meant to destroy anything in their path. Daniel's unit had been scattered during the fight. One moment he was shoulder to shoulder with his comrades, and the next, the chaos swallowed them all. Alone, Daniel moved through the ruins of what once had been a peaceful settlement. The streets were cracked, the walls broken, and the buildings stood like skeletons against a sky filled with smoke. He could hear the distant clash of humans and the alien race known as the Xylarans. Their voices were sharp, almost musical, carrying both anger and pain. Daniel had been taught to see them as the enemy, dangerous creatures who wanted humanity gone. Yet in that moment, all he wanted was to survive, to find his unit again, to escape the death that hung heavy in the air. His pulse raced as he ducked into the shadow of a broken wall, gripping his weapon tightly. Then he heard it. It wasn't the roar of battle. It wasn't the shout of soldiers or the hiss of alien fire. It was a sound far smaller, softer. A whimper. A cry, almost like a child calling out in fear. Daniel froze, confused. He told himself it couldn't be what he thought it was. But the sound came again, trembling and weak. Slowly, carefully he followed it, weaving through the broken remains of the street. Every step felt heavier, torn between the instinct to move away and the strange pull that guided him forward. Behind the shattered remains of a transport vehicle, he found the source. It was a Xylaran child. The little one could not have been more than 5 or 6 in human years, though their kind matured differently. Its skin shimmered with a faint silver glow, its large eyes wide with fear, reflecting the fires around them. The child's small hands clutched at its knees, trembling as it tried to make itself invisible in the wreckage. Daniel's training screamed at him. This was the enemy. This was the kind he had been fighting against, the kind who had killed humans in battle. He should turn away. He should leave it there. That was what war demanded. But his heart refused. In that instant, Daniel did not see an alien. He saw only a child, terrified and lost, just as human children might be in a place torn apart by war. The fear in those eyes was the same. The helplessness was the same. He lowered his weapon slightly, breathing hard, torn between 2 impossible choices. The sound of heavy footsteps broke his thoughts. Across the street, armored Xylaran warriors appeared, their tall forms glimmering like metal shadows in the smoke. Their weapons scanned the ruins, searching for survivors, for enemies, for anyone who stood in their way. Daniel knew they would not hesitate if they saw him. He pressed himself against the wreckage, his heart pounding. The child whimpered again. Too frightened to remain silent, the soldiers turned, their glowing eyes fixed on the sound. They began to approach. Daniel didn't think. He moved. In a blur, he rushed forward, his body acting before his mind could argue. He threw himself over the small figure, wrapping his arms around it and pressing it close to his chest. The child stiffened, shocked, but Daniel held firm. He could feel the tiny heartbeat pounding wildly, like a bird caught in his hands. The world erupted around them. Weapons fire tore through the air, slamming into the wreckage, sending shards of metal and stone flying in every direction. Daniel felt the impact against his armor, the sting of heat and pressure. He shielded the child with his own body, curling himself around it as tightly as he could. Every second felt endless. His mind screamed at him for his choice. He should have run. He should have saved himself. Yet even as the thought came, he knew he would not let go. The child clung to him now, its small hands gripping his uniform as if it somehow understood that this stranger, this human, was trying to protect it. The storm of fire finally ceased. The ground was littered with smoke and fragments. Daniel didn't move at first, listening for the sound of his own breath. the faint heartbeat beneath his arms. Slowly, he raised his head. The Zelaran warriors stood just beyond the wreckage. They had seen everything. Their glowing eyes were unreadable, but their weapons remained lowered. None of them fired. None of them advanced. Instead, they stared at the human soldier who had thrown himself over their child, shielding it with his own flesh. For a long moment, the battlefield was silent. Only the wind carried the smoke away, whispering through the broken walls. Daniel's arms trembled as he tightened his hold, prepared for the end. He had no illusions. If they chose to kill him now, he would not resist. But the end did not come. The warriors exchanged glances, their sharp voices murmuring in a language Daniel could not understand. Then, almost as one, they stepped back. The air between them grew heavy, not with violence, but with something else, entirely. Respect, confusion, perhaps even awe. Daniel slowly stood, the child still in his arms. He knew he had marked himself, forever in that moment. To his comrades, if they ever learned of this, he would be called reckless, foolish, maybe even a traitor. To the Xylarans, he had done something unthinkable, something that would not be forgotten. As the smoke cleared and the silence deepened, Daniel realized one truth. He had not chosen this path for glory, or for his people, or for their war. He had chosen it because, deep in his heart, he could not walk away from a child in need, no matter what species it belonged to. And that single choice was about to change everything. Daniel's arm still trembled from the weight of the moment. He had expected to die shielding the alien child, but death never came. Instead, the warriors of the Xylaran stood still, watching him with a silence that pressed heavier than any gunfire. He could feel the child breathing against his chest, its small body clinging to him as though it had known him forever. The silver shimmer of its skin glowed faintly in the smoke, and its wide eyes blinked up at him with something that looked like trust. That, more than anything, unsettled Daniel. How could a creature raised to fear humans find safety in his arms? Silence broke when one of the Xylaran soldiers stepped forward. He was taller than the rest, his armor carved with marks that spoke of rank and experience. His voice carried the strange musical tones of their language, but Daniel couldn't understand a word. What he did understand, however, was the way the warrior's eyes lingered, not on him, but on the child pressed against his chest. Two of the soldiers raised their weapons, not at Daniel, but as if signaling him to stay where he was. He did, not resist. Slowly, carefully, he lowered himself to one knee and placed the child on the ground. The little one resisted, clinging to his uniform, but Daniel whispered softly, trying to calm it. "It's all right," he said, his voice gentle though his heart was racing. "They're here for you. You're safe now." The child hesitated, looking between Daniel and the towering figures. Finally, with trembling steps, it moved toward the nearest warrior. The soldier knelt down, wrapping the child in long, protective arms. A sound like a sigh of relief passed through the group. Daniel exhaled slowly, a weight lifting from him. He should have felt relief too. He had done his part. He had saved a child, enemy or not. But the eyes of the warriors did not leave him. They spoke to each other in low voices, glancing his way as though unsure of what to make of him. Before he could act, strong hands seized him from behind. Two more soldiers had circled around and caught him in their grasp. He tried to pull free, but their grip was like iron. His weapon was wrenched from his hands, his arms forced behind his back. "Wait," he shouted, though he knew they didn't understand his words. His struggles were useless. Within seconds, he was bound, a prisoner in their hands. As they led him away, Daniel's mind churned. He had known this was likely. No matter what he had done, he was still a soldier of the enemy. The Xylarans would not simply let him walk free. Yet there was something strange in the way they looked at him. No hatred, no rage, only a curious weight, as though they were carrying a puzzle they could not solve. The march was long. Through ruined streets and broken fields they guided him, past the devastation of war. He saw their wounded being carried, their fallen being honored with strange, solemn gestures. For the first time, Daniel realized they were not so different from humans. They bled, they mourned, they protected their children with the same desperate love. When they reached their encampment, Daniel was thrown into a makeshift cell, an old storage chamber reinforced with steel. The door shut with a heavy clang, leaving him in dim light. He sat on the cold floor, his wrists still bound, his thoughts a storm inside his head. What would his own people say if they saw him now? Would they believe he had saved the child out of mercy? Or would they call him weak, a traitor to his kind? He had acted on instinct, nothing more. He couldn't explain it even to himself, only that he couldn't have walked away. Hours passed, though time was hard to measure in that place. Guards checked on him, their expressions unreadable. Once, the same child he had saved peeked in through the bars. Its large silver eyes locked on him, and for a brief moment, a small smile flickered on its face before a soldier gently led it away. That smile stayed with Daniel long after. It was near night when the whispers began. Outside his cell, soldiers spoke with hurried tones. Their words were strange, but Daniel caught one name repeated again and again, Scifi. He didn't know what it meant, but the way they spoke it carried weight, like a title of power. The door creaked open, and two guards motioned for him to rise. They cut the bindings on his wrists but held their weapons close as they led him out. Daniel walked between them, uncertain of his fate, every step heavier than the last. At the far end of the camp stood a grand structure, different from the crude shelters around it. Draped in banners of dark blue and silver, it glowed faintly under the alien lights. As they entered, Daniel felt his breath catch. The air itself seemed to hum. Seated upon a raised throne of black stone was a figure unlike any he had seen before. She was tall, regal, her silver skin glowing brighter than the rest. Her eyes were deep, sharp, and ancient, filled with both wisdom and strength. Though adorned with symbols of power, she carried herself with a calm grace that demanded respect. Daniel knew without being told. This was Queen Scifi, leader of the Xylerans. The guards pushed him forward until he stood at the center of the hall. His knees felt weak under her gaze, but he forced himself to stand tall. Whatever awaited him, he would face it with dignity. The queen's eyes studied him in silence. She did not look at him as an enemy to be destroyed, but as a mystery to be understood. Slowly she raised her hand. At her gesture, the child he had saved emerged from behind the throne, running forward. To Daniel's surprise, the child rushed past the guards and clung once more to his leg, refusing to let go. The hall filled with murmurs. The queen tilted her head, her sharp eyes narrowing slightly. Then, for the first time, she spoke. Her voice was strong yet strangely gentle, the words foreign yet carrying a weight Daniel could feel even without translation. The child had chosen him. Daniel's heart sank and swelled at once. He had saved a life, and in doing so he had crossed a line that could never be erased. He was no longer just a soldier. To these people, to this queen, he had become something else entirely. And in that moment, though he did not yet know how, Daniel realized The hall was silent, so silent that Daniel could hear the faint hum of the lights above and the uneven rhythm of his own breathing. The child clung to his leg, refusing to let go, while dozens of alien eyes watched with surprise and curiosity. Soldiers, advisors, and servants all stood frozen, unsure of what to make of the scene before them. Daniel stood stiff, trying not to move. He didn't know what was expected of him, nor what the queen would decide. All he knew was that every gaze in that room now judged him, weighed him, and measured the meaning of his single act. The queen, Scifi, leaned forward slightly on her throne. Her sharp eyes, glowing faintly, fixed on him with an intensity that made him feel as though she could see through every layer of his thoughts. She spoke slowly, her voice calm but commanding, a sound that carried across the chamber like music threaded with steel. Daniel couldn't understand her words, but he understood her presence. This was no ordinary ruler. She was a mother, a queen, and a leader of a people at war. Every decision she made carried the weight of thousands of lives. A translator stepped forward, a smaller Xyleran whose voice had been trained in human speech. Though accented, the words were clear enough for Daniel to follow. "The great Sarai asks," the translator said carefully, "why you risked your life for one of ours. Why, when you had every chance to leave the child to its fate, you chose, instead, to shield it with your own body." Daniel's throat tightened. How could he explain something that had felt less like a choice and more like a reflex? He swallowed, searching for the simplest truth. "I couldn't let a child die," he said quietly. "It doesn't matter if it is human or Xyleran. A child is still a child." The translator repeated his words in the alien tongue. A murmur rippled through the hall. Some soldiers looked unsettled, others thoughtful. The queen did not move. Her eyes stayed locked on him, unblinking. The child pressed itself closer to him, its small silver fingers gripping the fabric of his uniform. The queen's gaze shifted to her child, and for the first time something softened in her expression. She rose slowly from her throne and descended the steps, each movement graceful yet deliberate. The hall grew tense. No one dared to speak or breathe too loudly as the queen approached Daniel. She stopped just before him, her tall figure casting a shadow over his smaller frame. Her eyes dropped to the child, then lifted back to him. She says, the translator's voice wavered almost as though he himself couldn't believe the words, "that you are not a prisoner. You are claimed." Daniel blinked. "Claimed?" The translator nodded nervously. "The child has chosen you. By our law, by our bond. The one who defends a child at the risk of their own life becomes bound to that family. To reject this bond would shame the queen herself." The words hit Daniel like a blow. He hadn't saved the child to gain anything. He hadn't thought beyond the moment itself. But now his act of compassion had pulled him into a tradition he didn't understand, one that tied him directly to the queen and her people. The queen spoke again, her voice calm, yet heavy with finality. "She says you belong to her house now," the translator explained. "You will be under her protection and you will not be returned to your people." Daniel's heart sank. He had imagined capture, imprisonment, maybe even execution, but not this. Not being bound to the enemy's queen like some symbol of fate. "I didn't ask for this," he whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. But the child clung to him tighter, as if afraid he would vanish if it let go. The queen reached down, gently brushing her hand across the child's head. Her expression was unreadable, but there was no anger in her eyes. Only a strange mixture of pride and curiosity as she studied Daniel again. The hall erupted in debate. Advisors argued in sharp voices, some clearly opposed, others cautious. The translator whispered hurried explanations. Some believed keeping Daniel was dangerous, that humans would see it as an insult. Others insisted that his act proved not all humans were the same, and that this rare bond might change the course of the war. Through it all, the queen remained calm, her gaze never leaving Daniel. At last, she raised her hand, and the voices fell silent. Her decision was final. The translator turned to Daniel, his voice steady. "The queen declares that you are no longer enemy. You are now of her people. You will stay in her care, and she will see what purpose fate has for you." Daniel's chest tightened. He thought of his unit, his comrades who might still be out there searching for him. He thought of home, of the human faces he might never see again. And yet, he looked down at the small silver child clutching him with such trust, and he felt torn in two. Later, he was escorted from the hall, not in chains, but with guards walking close on either side. The atmosphere was different now. No one treated him as a common prisoner. Instead, they looked at him with curiosity, even respect. Whispers followed him as he passed, voices rising and falling like the echo of waves. In the chamber given to him far better than any cell, Daniel sat in silence. He had a bed, food, and light. It was not home, but it was not prison either. Still, the walls pressed in on him, carrying the weight of what had just happened. He had not only saved a child's life, he had bound himself to it, and through that, to its mother. That night, Daniel lay awake, staring at the alien ceiling above him. The child's silver eyes haunted his thoughts, as did the Queen's sharp, unreadable gaze. He was no longer simply Daniel Hayes, soldier of Earth. He had become something else, something neither human nor Zilaran fully understood. And deep in his heart, he knew this was only the beginning. The days that followed were strange for Daniel. He was no longer locked behind bars, yet he was not free either. Guards accompanied him wherever he went, watching his every step. Still, their eyes held no hatred. Instead, they carried the same curious expression he had seen since the moment in the throne room. He was no longer just a human soldier to them. He was something different, something that unsettled them and fascinated them at the same time. The Queen had kept her word. Daniel was given food, clothing, and a chamber to sleep in. It was nothing like his quarters back in the human camps. The walls glowed faintly with a soft silver light. The air carried a sweet, unfamiliar scent, and the bedding was made of woven strands that shifted to the shape of his body when he lay down. Everything reminded him he was no longer among his own kind. But what unsettled him most was not the chamber, nor the guards, nor even the Queen's silent gaze when she summoned him. It was the child. Every day the small Xylaran came to see him. Sometimes it carried toys carved from crystal, sometimes scraps of food, sometimes nothing at all. It would sit near him, watching him with wide eyes, as if simply being close was enough. Daniel tried to keep some distance at first, unsure how much he should allow himself to care. But slowly the child's laughter, its gentle curiosity, began to thaw the wall he tried to build around himself. He found himself smiling when it tugged at his sleeve or when it pointed at objects, waiting for him to say the human word for them. The child repeated the words clumsily, its voice rising with excitement whenever it managed to get close. Without meaning to, Daniel had become its teacher, and in turn, it taught him pieces of its language, simple sounds that slowly began to make sense. One evening when the camp quieted and the stars glimmered above, the Queen called for him. Daniel was led into a large open chamber where she stood alone, her silver glow shining brighter under the night sky that spilled through an open ceiling. She did not speak at first. She only studied him, her sharp eyes searching his face. When she finally spoke, the translator was not there. Her words were unfamiliar, yet she gestured with her hand, as if inviting him to step closer. Daniel hesitated, but obeyed. His steps echoed softly against the stone floor. He stopped a respectful distance away, uncertain what she wanted. The Queen extended her hand and placed it over her chest. Then she said one word clearly. Sarai. Daniel blinked. She was giving her name. He had known it from whispers, but now she was offering it herself. Slowly, awkwardly, he placed his hand against his own chest. Daniel. A faint smile touched her lips. She repeated his name softly, her voice shaping the syllables strangely but carefully. Then she spoke again, pointing toward the stars above, her voice carrying a tone that almost sounded like a question. Daniel could not understand, but something about her gesture, the way she looked at him, made him realize she was asking more than words could explain. Perhaps she wanted to know where he came from. Perhaps she wondered what kind of people could create someone who would protect an enemy child. He could not answer her properly, but he tried. He pointed to the stars too, then touched his chest again. Home, he said softly. Far away. For a long moment the Queen studied him. Then she nodded slowly, as though she understood enough. In the days that followed, she called him often. Sometimes she asked questions through the translator, testing his thoughts. Sometimes she only observed him with her child, watching the bond between them grow stronger. And sometimes Daniel felt something heavier in her gaze, something he could not name, but that pressed against him like invisible weight. His heart was divided. Part of him longed for his unit, for his comrades, for the familiar comfort of his own people. He wondered if they thought him dead, or worse, a deserter. He imagined the whispers that might spread among his fellow soldiers. Hayes saved an alien child. Hayes threw away his duty. Hayes betrayed us. But another part of him could not ignore what he was learning here. The Xylarans were not the monsters the humans painted them to be. They had families, laughter, stories of their ancestors, traditions that stretched back farther than human history. They mourned their dead, protected their young, and honored courage. The more Daniel saw, the more he realized how much of the war was built on misunderstanding and fear. Yet the weight of his new bond with the Queen unsettled him deeply. She had claimed him, not as a prisoner, but as something else entirely. To her, he was tied by fate, by the choice he had made when he shielded her child. He did not know if she saw him as a protector, an ally, or something more, but every time her eyes lingered on him, he felt the walls closing in tighter. One evening, he overheard two guards whispering outside his chamber. Though he understood only fragments of their language, he caught enough to know they were speaking about him. One word repeated again and again: symbol. That was what he was becoming. Not a man, not even a soldier anymore, but a symbol to both sides. To the humans, he might be seen as a traitor. To the Xylarans, he was proof that compassion could exist between enemies. He carried a meaning larger than himself, and it frightened him more than the battlefield ever had. Late that night, the child fell asleep in his arms, its small chest rising and falling in peaceful rhythm. Daniel looked down at it, torn. He had saved one life, but now that act bound him to a destiny he had never asked for. He whispered to himself, his voice low and weary, "What have I done?" And deep within the camp, in her private chamber, Queen Sarai watched the stars, her thoughts just as restless. She had seen warriors rise and fall, but never a human who would risk everything for one of her kind. To her, Daniel Hayes was no longer simply a soldier. He was a turning point, and she would not let him go. Time passed slowly in the Xylaran camp. Daniel had grown accustomed to the rhythms of their world, yet he could never forget the life he had left behind. Thoughts of his unit, of the home he might never see again, lingered in his mind like ghosts. Still, he could not ignore the bond he had formed with the child he had saved, or the queen who had claimed him. Every step he took reminded him that his act of compassion had created a connection far stronger than any chain. One morning, the camp was filled with unusual tension. Word had spread that human forces had advanced closer to the Xylaran territory, searching for Daniel. Soldiers whispered nervously, and even the child seemed to sense the shift in the air. Daniel knew this meant he could not remain hidden forever. His past life had caught up with him, and he had to confront it. The Queen summoned him once again. Her gaze was steady, unyielding, yet softened slightly by the presence of her child, who clung to her side. Daniel entered the hall, his steps cautious, unsure what she expected from him. She motioned for him to kneel, a sign of respect in their culture, and then spoke through the translator. "The humans are coming," the translator said. "They demand your return. They will not accept that you are here. The choice is yours." Daniel's chest tightened. He had imagined this moment, but he had never wanted it. He thought of his comrades, the people he had trained with, fought beside, and laughed with. They might see him as lost, as someone who had betrayed his own kind. Yet he looked at the child, whose silver eyes watched him with trust and hope, and he knew that leaving now would feel like betrayal in another way. The Queen stepped closer, her eyes locking onto his. "You may go," she said through the translator, "but know this. To leave will change everything. To stay may change everything as well. Your choice will define not only your life, but the lives of many." Daniel felt the weight of her words settle over him. He was no longer just a soldier. He was a protector, a bridge between two worlds, and perhaps a symbol of hope for something larger than himself. He thought of the child, now tugging gently at his sleeve. Its tiny hands were soft, its expression full of innocent expectation. Daniel's heart ached with a mixture of love, responsibility, and fear. He realized then that his act of protecting the child had begun a journey neither he nor the Xylarans could have foreseen. Finally, he spoke, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I cannot go back. Not yet. I will stay, and I will do my part here." The queen's eyes softened, a faint smile brushing her lips. The child laughed, a sound like music to Daniel's ears, and ran into his arms. For the first time, he allowed himself to feel peace. Days turned into weeks, and Daniel began to learn the ways of the Xylarans. He trained with their warriors, not as an enemy, but as an ally. He learned their language, their customs, and the stories of their ancestors. With each passing day, he became more integrated into their world, though he never forgot his own. The bond between him and the child grew stronger. They shared lessons, games, and quiet moments beneath the shimmering alien sky. Daniel had become a guardian, a teacher, and a friend. And in the queen's eyes, he saw a growing respect, a recognition of courage and heart that went beyond species or culture. Yet the tension of war never fully disappeared. Messages arrived from human commanders, demanding his return, insisting that he had been captured, or worse, lost. But Daniel knew that neither threats nor anger could undo the choice he had made. He had acted from his heart, and now he lived with the consequences, whether others understood or not. One evening, as the twin moons rose over the camp, Daniel stood on a high terrace overlooking the settlement. The child climbed beside him, pointing excitedly at the lights below. Daniel looked out over the horizon and realized that the world had grown larger than he had ever imagined. Two species, two lives intertwined by an act of courage, could perhaps change the fate of many. The queen approached silently, her presence calm yet powerful. She spoke without words this time, merely placing a hand on his shoulder. In that touch, Daniel felt acknowledgement, gratitude, and a quiet promise that his actions mattered, not just for the child, but for the future of both their peoples. Daniel knelt, holding the child close, and whispered words of comfort and love. Though they did not share a human language fully, their hearts understood each other perfectly. In that moment, he knew that he had made the right choice, even if it meant leaving one life behind to protect another. The camp was peaceful that night. Fires burned softly, shadows danced on the walls, and for the first time since the battle, Daniel felt a calm he had never known in war. He had entered the Xylaran world as a soldier, alone and uncertain, but now he was a protector, a teacher, and a bridge between two species. In the quiet hours, he thought of home. He thought of Earth, of his family and friends, and of the comrades he might never see again. Yet he understood that life had changed. He was no longer just a human soldier. He was part of something greater, something born from courage, mercy, and the choice to protect a child when all else seemed lost. As dawn broke over the alien landscape, Daniel held the child close and looked toward the horizon. He did not know what the future would bring, nor how humans or Xylarans would respond to his choice. But he knew one thing for certain. He had acted from his heart, and that act had created a bond that could not be broken. He had defended a child with his own body, and in doing so, he had changed the course of his life forever. And now, under the watchful eyes of the queen and with the laughter of the child echoing in his ears, he knew that he had finally found a place where courage and compassion were more powerful than fear or hate. Daniel Hayes, soldier of Earth, had become a guardian of the Xylaran child, a symbol of hope, and a living bridge between two worlds that had once seen only conflict. He did not know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew he would face it with the same courage that had saved a life, and the same heart that had chosen to protect innocence above all else. And in that choice, he had found a kind of peace, a kind of belonging, and a story that would be remembered long after the guns fell silent.